Stetmann. A commander that is phenomenal in most ways, yet I still manage to have a problem with him, as Stetmann is just too good for the under-average player like me. Yes, me. Now you might be wondering, why are you watching a video from someone who calls himself below average? This is because I don't go for the best moves and the best strategic moves. For me, my games are like a roll of dice. They rather work or they don't work. But in doing this provides me an excellent opportunity to make these videos. With how I play the game most of the time, it allows me to teach you the strategies that could make me a lot more successful in game in the much higher difficulties especially, and that I should use more often. While my primal playstyle of this game that I've been using to this day, otherwise known as spamming, otherwise known as why the hell is my frame rate so low. However, spamming allows me the best opportunity to show off each unit and ability while teaching you the do's and don'ts of each commander, giving you an idea of how these units work, then overall giving you an idea of how you want to make your army based on the map, the type of enemies, or generally the units you want to make. And believe me, there is more than enough different types of units and abilities to choose from. Now before we get into the contents of the video, there are two things I have to say that might interest you. First is that every single commander besides the last one being Minx has their own respective video that share a much similar format. So if you are interested in how to play any of these other commanders previous to Egon Stetmann, scroll down below in the description. There is a link to a playlist for every commander's video. And if you like any of the content you're seeing here, be sure to scroll down below and hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of the content, as more of you watch and not subscribing, and that's unfortunate because it is a very much free feature, which is amazing, and it keeps you up with every single video coming out. Secondly, and hopefully last, if you want to be more involved with the community and the content coming out, I have now finally set up a Discord server for the channel. Get involved with the channel, playing games, and find like-minded people. There is a link for my Discord along with all my other social medias in the description below. Now with further ado, let's move on to the crazed, drug-induced maniac that is Egon Stetmann, and yes, those two N's are real, not a typo. Egon Stetmann, as most people know, is just Stetmann, making an appearance in the Wings of Liberty campaign as Raynor's chief scientist, with a very minimal role as he just analyzes the Zerg and Protoss artifacts that you find throughout the campaign. However, it seems that this was rather a secret project or just Blizzard secretly revealing that he would become a commander. I don't know if that's 100%, but that's what we're going with. Now, since that time, Stetmann has been stranded on a planet alone with a little bit too much time to himself and has found a way to combine all three factions into one grand and very powerful army. This army is known as the Mecha Swarm. Robotic Zerg with Terran upgrades and Protoss mechanics and effects. Is that not only does Stetmann's army absorb all of the unit's strengths, but also absorbs all their weaknesses. For example, you'll find that having a Zerg army not only means you have a powerful army, but it means a lot of your units are going to be locked behind tiers. Having Terran upgrades are powerful, but they're also going to be numerous and you're going to have to pay a lot for them. And then when it comes down to the Protoss commanders of specialized units, yes, you have very strong and specialized units for certain tasks, but it also means you're going to need to be paying through the roof for every single specialized unit, which is just ridiculous. Now, something I found overall about Stetmann is that your pacing in the game is dependent on the type of army or specialization you choose. Fast pacing overall is Stetmann's kit, but this fast pace in the game is divided into three sections. One is by the work at the base and the amount of hatcheries you need to maintain an army. Secondly, it is about the economy and getting your expansions open as early as possible. And the third one is the ability to influence over the map with your ability. Each troop is going to require one of each specialization, or sometimes two, or unfortunately will need all three of these to be extremely fast. Again, Stetmann is not a commander I would recommend new players, and I'd normally reserve him for more the experienced players, but again, to each their own. Now with the talk of influencing around the map, I can clarify it with the next section of the video, which is going to be the abilities. Very powerful when used at the right time and the right circumstance, and can be best used to accommodate you and your allies during certain points, as you'll find that most of his units are going to need one of these three effects constantly in order to be extremely powerful. Now, as it goes for the abilities, Stetmann goes a little bit overboard on the naming process. You see, when a scientist or anyone in the nature of discovery or inventing, they name it after themselves to go down in history, and I don't blame them, as his ability to deploy satellites around the map, which he likes to call Stetellites. Yeah, I know, creativity, right? Stetellites, a small satellites deployed around the map, kind of like creep tumors that create fields with switchable buffs depending on your needs. Stetellites are normally invincible and can actually only be killed during deployment. Otherwise, it can just be knocked out for a very small amount of time. You have a max of 5 charges with a very fast cooldown. The amount of total charges you have can increase depending on how much hatcheries, hives, or lairs you have on the battlefield. Your base starts with a very small field, and as you spread that field by connecting other Stetellites to that field. This field can eventually cover the entire map, covering quite a large area at base that Stetmann's units very much need, as you will soon learn that Stetmann's units must be able to operate in this field in order to be actually worth fighting with in battle. So again, depending on the army that you choose to make, depends on how aggressive you need to be with spreading this. This will also be dependent on the map as well. Now normally I would go into the mechanics before the abilities, as most of my videos go. However, to understand the mechanics of the commander, you must understand each type of buff that is available for these giant fields that eventually cover the entire map. However, they do have questionable names, as I've mentioned before. The first of the power fields is the Fun Accelerator for Speedy Transportation Configuration. I know, it's quite a mouthful, which translates exactly to fast. Yeah, that's what it should spell, but let's just put it to fast for simplicity. And you would not believe the ability it gives you. Yeah, I know, creative, right? Fast increases the movement speed of all your units by a whopping 100%. Best used in the combat sense for moving troops around the controlled area, reacting to attack waves, and objectives alike. However, an unspoken buff that isn't really talked about as much is that it boosts the speed of your harvesters for resource production, whether it's gas or minerals. And even though the distance between the mineral fields and the bases are very, very minimal, it actually makes a considerable differences, and damn, you're gonna need these resources. Keep in mind that this is the power field that should be on most of the game, and you only need to switch whenever you need those others filled. If not, just stay to speed. Next up is the best and most important to keep your team alive. Codename Health Uptick Generation System Configuration. Yes, that's right. The best ability and most infamous ability is called Hugs. Your team very much needs hugs to stay alive. It is a green ability field that heals 6 health per second and only 3 for your ally, giving you 50%, which of course is the same thing with the speed bonus as well. I would recommend only using it in the middle of combat or after combat to keep troops topped up on health, as most squishy units are going to rely on this ability during combat, and much more tankier units are going to require this ability after combat to make sure that they're always ready for the next fight. And the last of the 3 abilities you can switch from is energy regeneration. All of Egon Stetmann's units are not actually capable of recharging their energy alone like most other factions. Now this purple field is known as the just-in-time uninterruptible input charging Egonergy. Yes, not energy, Egonergy. Again, we're going a little overboard on the names here again. Codename Juice is an ability based on regenerating small energy reserves that Stetmann's troops have for both passive and active abilities. Each troop has one of these upgrades. And like healing, it is best used after a fight and rarely during, due to the fact that Egonergy abilities eat up quite a bit of energy. Again, it's very dependent on the units, but I would recommend using them after combat, not during combat. You're better used for healing. Overall, concerning the Stettellites, you should make sure to deploy them as soon as they are ready, as you can maximize your influence across the entire map earlier, giving you much more possibilities for your army to move around, as some units are very much dependent on at least one of these 3. The speed boost should be active most, followed by the healing during combat to keep units alive, and finally make sure that the units are topped off on Egonergy after or rarely during a fight. Again, I wouldn't highly recommend it. Your success is highly dependent on how good you are at reading those situations where you need these types of Egonergy fields. Now normally the mechanics section of the video is normally after the abilities. However, to truly understand the impact of the mechanics, you first need to know all of the stat fields and what they're able to offer for both you and your ally. Now Stetmann's mechanics are both about using his hero unit, which so happens to be his best friend, that benefits the army in really unconventional ways. However, they might shock you. Starting with Egon Stetmann's best friend, the infamous and legendary Gary. It's just Gary. Gary is a machine with a quite sassy personality that exists to make sure Egon Stetmann does not go insane alone on the planet. Sorry, insane-er. Gary's a flying robot with average damage, average range, average health, and average fire rate. He's not particularly amazing in any field, yet he's still the jack of all trades that can contribute to his army in any sort of way, not only for damage but also for support. For the attack, Gary has the E-Gorb, a giant death ball of energy dealing amazing yet constant damage to any enemy as it slowly travels forward. Best used on attack waves and wearing down extremely large enemies like hybrids. Also be sure to use it in Stet Zone for a free 2 extra orbs on top of that ability upon activation. Using it outside of the Stet Zone is only going to yield only 1 giant orb, still doing the same amount of damage, but while in a Stet Zone you get a lot more coverage. I mean, look at the size difference here. And for support, Gary has the Stetellite Overcharge and initiate a massive boost depending on which one is selected. If fast is selected, all units inside of the stat fields get a 20% attack speed increase. If you decide to boost hugs, it gives all units inside the area a 60 health energy barrier, which is really good at saving the lives at your most expendable units. Last, of course, is the juice boost, which really I can't really recommend with a immediate energy boost and a higher regeneration. Just know that each effect lasts 45 seconds, and out of all of them, I wouldn't really recommend boosting the Egonergy recharge if you ask me. For speed around the map, as if you already didn't have an ability for that, you have the semi-stable mass transportation. Gary and all nearby units of your own will be instantly transported to a Stetellite of your choice. Keep in mind that the Stetellite needs to be active and should only be used for emergency purposes only due to the nasty cooldown it comes with. Free of charge, might I add. And if you're somehow still unsatisfied even after that, don't worry. Once you've unlocked Tech 3 and for a massive investment in resources, you get the even more infamous and even more legendary Super Gary. Now, as you would imagine, the comparison between Gary and Super Gary is that Super Gary is just better in every way, and you would be right. He has more health, more damage, and a slightly faster increased rate of fire. It's nothing drastic, but it is slightly faster. The main thing, of course, is that not only does he get all of these stat boosts, but he also gets this amazing ability that allows his troops to break out of their comfort zone, is the Gary Field, a mobile Stetellite effect that lasts for 30 seconds. Now, considering the fact most of his troops rely on a Stetellite effect in order to be any form of good, this of course is a very, very, very powerful ability, and unfortunately is not added with his other bonus, which is that all of the abilities I've already mentioned, he now gets 2 charges of each, but only gets 1 charge of this mobile field. However, that's gonna cost you a lot of resources that puts even the Protoss to shame. Good lord. Now, there are 2 more upgrades for Egon Stetmann that play very important roles in his overall mechanics, so I'll be brief. The level 9 upgrade is Friends Forever. Gary and Stetellites are now able to pick up scraps from your quote-unquote lost friends, but only after death. Each unit will give a certain amount of parts, and have enough parts, you can rebuild a unit completely for free at their respectful buildings that you unlock them at. So even if you take massive losses and lose like 90% of your Zerglings, you're gonna get about 50 to 25% of them back, so you never truly lose an army completely. And the last upgrade before we go into the more interesting part of the video, which of course is the troops, is the level 15 upgrade, pushing the Egonvelope. You see what he did there? Haha, not funny. Pushing the Egonvelope is a powerful upgrade for Stetmann's troops that rely on abilities and upgrades that make them unique and worth their price. Now allowing buildings to research 2 upgrades simultaneously, drastically increasing the speed on how early you can get your very powerful units. And you'll soon learn that every single unit is going to have some ability that is going to consume Egonergy, and some that are just going to be overall passive upgrades of quality of life. And now we move on to the more interesting part of the video, which of course is the units. Very powerful, very expensive, and a mix of all factions' power. However, you'll find that they're also absorbing the good and the bad, which they don't really talk about, but let's move on!
Nothing else I've created compares!
Now, as it goes for Stetmann's kit, there is a lot to cover, as each troop has an insane amount of depth to every single troop to make them as powerful as they can be. So be warned, there is a lot of abilities and upgrades concerned with each unit. I'll be as quickly as possible. Stetmann's troops have the Zerg template, which means, for those who don't know, it is work in a tier system. The hatchery at tier 1 is just for getting the job done with just sheer numbers and damage, and quite literally nothing else. Whereas one is very cheap and the other is, well, However, when we talk about tier 2 and tier 3 with the lair and the hive, you talk about more the expensive units that are rather built for more specialized purposes or overall versatility. Now we start with the tier 1 units that both share their domination in very large numbers and technically having very vastly different uses and jobs for an army. And oh boy do they hit hard! Starting out with the Mecha Zerglings, still overwhelming in large numbers with melee, which is a problem when dealing with air units. Turns out short claws can't hit fighters and gunships in the sky. Who knew? With a high need for Stetellites and hatcheries to increase the larva production to keep those numbers alive. Again, they might be powerful, but they still work in the exact same way of overwhelming numbers. But what makes a difference is not only do they have a quality of life upgrade and an offensive upgrade, but they have a survivability upgrade, which is the first ever for a Zergling. With the base upgrade to increase the base speed by 60%, as if there already isn't an ability for that, while upgrades like synthetic adrenaline pumps use Egonergy of its total 50 that it can hold to increase its attack speed by a whopping 100%. Surprisingly, above all others, which makes the Mecha Zerglings Stetmann's best units by far, at least for dealing with ground threats, is the hardened Egonergy shield, increasing damage resistance for a short time, however consuming more Egonergy, and can run out severely quickly. This actually makes them almost unkillable on the condition that they are constantly getting hugs from the Stetellite zones. If you couldn't tell by that description, I very highly recommend Zerglings. As a matter of fact, out of the best army composition you can probably make with Egon Stetmann, Zerglings is 1/3 of that equation. Next up, and unfortunately the last of the tier 1 units, is the Mecha Baneling, an evolution of the Zergling anywhere on the battlefield, essentially a rolling toxic sack that blows up on contact of enemies, dealing high bursts of damage and best used on attack waves and large amounts of clumped up enemies. With upgrades that allow the Banelings to survive before they get to the impact, as they are much better the less damage they take. Rocket Servos reduces the time between their targets by increasing their movement speed by 15%, and as if that wasn't scary enough, they are now able to leap at their targets, almost to completely avoid damage before the last few meters of contact. For the damage reduction, you have a barrier upgrades that uses 2 Egonergy per use to avoid some of the damage taken, but flat out not all of it. And the last ability, the reason why these 2 abilities are important for shortening the distance and protecting their health as much as possible so that they don't use as much energy, is the fact that they have the Egonergy Enhanced Explosive. Whatever energy the Baneling has left that doesn't use on its barrier to reduce the total damage they take, it adds to their total damage, having situations where they almost one-shot everything. Keep in mind, this is just tier 1 units. Now when it comes to tier 2, we start out with the best unit in Stetmann's arsenal at really almost everything, which of course is the Mecha Hydralisks. A great all-around unit and specialized at taking care of air threats, but due to its very squishy nature, it can't really take as much damage as I would like. On its back is a missile launcher. Yes, a missile launcher capable of dealing high damage at extremely fast rates with a tendency to do so much damage to the point of overkill. Overkilling targets is a problem. That is how powerful they are. Don't get me wrong. The basic needles used for both air and ground targets is still amazing, but far out damaged and far outranged from its missile counterpart. With upgrades to not only unlock the missiles that consume Egonergy at an extremely fast rate that needs constant refilling, the tier class targeting system increases the missile's range by 3, allowing all Hydralisks spam to target a single area, absolutely obliterating air targets, and especially easier at swarming targets considering the fact that, like the Zergling, it has a base speed upgrade of 50%. Just keep in mind that these guys not only are going to need a constant refilling of Egonergy, but in combat, they very much need that health boost because, again, they can't really take as much damage as they deal. Now, like the Baneling and the Zerglings with their very weird relationship, is the Mecha Lurker, an evolution of the Mecha Hydralisk, and don't ask me how metal can morph, that's beyond me, but this unit is very, very powerful, yet very, very specialized. Morphing into a unit that quite actually can attack normally, but burrows underground and unleashes a hail of mechanical spikes, absolutely dominating the ground, predominantly light units in large quantities, eating through their Egonergy reserves very quickly with 2 specialized abilities. First is the Tunnel of Terror. While the Lurker is underground, they are capable of moving underground with this ability as the ground above them is pushed forward as them as well, and all enemies on that path is damaged and knocked back severely. The second, of course, is the Focus Strike. This one eats up a lot more of their energy reserves, but is going to be able to deal higher numbers of damage. All spikes now are centered into a relatively close range area around dealing large amounts of damage for about 10 seconds. Keep in mind that this is not the start, as you do need to unlock the ability to increase the range of it to something that's more usable. And the last of the tier 2 units, and completely built for air dominance, is the Mecha Corruptor. With energy reserves and missiles that are just too deadly for their own good. Mecha Corruptors dominates the skies with cluster busters that deal large amounts of area damage, and in that certain area can be upgraded by 100% with upgrades. Now, being an air dominance fighter means they kind of suck against ground. They're not completely worthless as an army, as they can puke with a TerraClean solvent, which does massive damage over time. However, it doesn't deserve the hype it gets because they still need to be locked on that target, absolutely removing their anti-air capability and removing their ability to move. So it's kind of a hard sell. I would recommend to have these guys in large enough quantities, but not dominating your entire army. This is due to the fact that you will excel in killing air targets, but you are going to be absolutely garbage with handling against ground and structures. Last of the units is the tier 3 troops that will charge you through the roof and hinder you in some ways, but this trade-off is very powerful as you create army wrecking units capable of bulldozing all enemies in front of you, or behind you, or above you. It kills everything. Let's just be perfectly clear about that. Stetmann's tier 3 units are divided into 3 sections, being ground, air, and support, all playing major and important roles, however not mandatory. For the ground, a hulking tank of untold death and destruction for both you and your enemies is the Mecha Ultralisk. Now, the Mecha Ultralisk is the best frontline troop and one of the few troops that can safely leave the stat zones and still do effective fighting. However, that buff a great thing to have. Having massive pools of health and egonergy with a specialization of taking down mechanical units and armor. With ability upgrades of all types, from a straight up damage reduction of 25% for starters. Starting with the ability to burrow charge towards enemies, breaking their lines, while upgrades like stunning mechanical ground units with the electrostatic surprise, creating openings where your team needs them most. While the Ultralisk has a high risk, high reward sustain method, being the Mecha Mooch module, sapping 25 life from all nearby mechanical units and heals their own HP. What this effect does not tell you is that said mechanical units can be yours, your allies, or your enemies. So you could be killing your own army the 1 minute, and you could be killing your allies' army the next minute, which I'd imagine they wouldn't be so happy about. And of course, you're going to be killing the enemy's units as well. It's a hard sell, but very powerful. For the air, you have access to the most expensive, yet one of the most powerful units, the Mecha Battle Carrier Lord. As you can see, is a Mecha Brood Lord with a few other interesting abilities. As you should know, the Mecha Brood Lord essentially is an air artillery, dealing damage at very long range yet very flimsy despite its large size. Launching 2 Mecha Broodlings at the enemy, dealing damage on initial impact, and later the Broodlings swarm in large numbers. However, the other parts of its name, the Battle Carrier, comes from both other factions. The battle part comes from the Terrans due to him having access to the Stetmotto cannon, using up a very large amount of his energy supply and absolutely decimating with huge amounts of damage and range. While the carrier part comes from the Protoss carriers, launching Locust Scepters that not only give it an air defense but also doubling down on its ground attack. These guys are very expensive and are evolved from Corruptors, but oh boy are they powerful, and they hit like a fucking train. And the last of the tier 3 units for the support role is the Mecha Infestor. Now, this unit overall is not as great as people make it out to be. The Mecha Infestor doesn't have a basic attack as it is, and it is an ability reliant unit. This means they are going to have heavy consumption of Egonergy, but you will soon learn that this is not enough for its most basic ability to not even work, or only work once before they need a recharge. Roaches Away is the main ability of the Mecha Infestor, overwhelming the unit, as it spawns 2 Mecha Roaches into battle, costing a massive 250 energy out of its 400 max. You see the problem I have with him here. Also capable of infesting structures with Roach Knights, dealing 500 damage to buildings for 10 seconds. If the building is destroyed within those 10 seconds, it spawns a Mecha Roach, making the Infestor a great siege unit. and later upgrade all Mecha Roaches into Mecha Ravengers, making them much more potent in almost every single way. The last of the Mecha Infestor's ability is the UMIC Charging Protocol, a support tool costing a very small amount of Egon energy, connecting to your units and giving them an immediate health and Egon energy boost instantly while regenerating a massive amount over the next 20 seconds. Very powerful for units outside of the power field that is the stat fields. So now you know the abilities, mechanics, and units for this commander. Now mastery perks are rewarded for those who surpass the level of 15 and for 90 levels of small yet very powerful upgrades for certain parts of the commander, which is of course called the mastery perk system. Now first is power set 1 with the choice between Gary or the overall army. Reducing the ability cooldowns of Gary to a maximum of 30% is where most people go, as his abilities are very important for not only the entire army, but for the entire commander itself. So this isn't particularly a bad choice. However, upgrading the price reduction is my personal favorite as it reduces the cost of the damage and armor upgrades to a maximum of 60%. And I go for this one because having your units more powerful for much cheaper and a lot earlier is a ridiculously huge upgrade compared to a simple ability cooldown. Power set 2 is about Egonergy or Stet Field, as both play a very important role in the commander. Stet Field bonuses increased by 60% are more versatile of the two, making the effect much more powerful in the field that affect both Gary and his army. It's the versatility of the speed, Egonergy, and healing is why it's so damn good. The other choice to increase max Egonergy pool for all units is very powerful for sustained fighting and spamming abilities use of the Egonergy, but I can only recommend this if you're really just gonna spam Mecha Infestors. Are you really gonna spend an entire mastery perk just to increase the effectiveness of one unit? Power set 3 is about the structures that affect the gameplay speed to some capacity. Reducing the cooldown of Stetellites to a maximum of 5 seconds is very powerful, but only works really on those who need those expansions a lot earlier and is not a defensive map. Very powerful upgrade, but has some sort of limits to it. On the other hand, which I later swapped to, was the structure morph rate increased to 60% faster. Very powerful stuff indeed, as it allows players to have higher tier units and even Super Gary a lot earlier in the game, while setting up expansion has just become a million times easier. Finally, for the last of Stetmann is the prestige system, a system that is for only the committed and the people who have a little bit too much time on their hands, I'm gonna admit. But the prestige system essentially unlocks an entire new way to play, creating some disadvantages but also creating some completely new mechanics that almost change up the entire commander. Signal Servant is about Gary and the Stetellites you deploy. Taking away the ability to have Super Gary in games means no mobile stat fields. For this trade-off, you get 50% larger area covered by Stetellites, and when Stetellites are active, they cannot be disabled in any way. However, they can still very much be killed on deployment. Best Buddy is prestige to massively buffing Gary in many ways while drastically hindering him at the same time. Let me explain. Best Buddy prestige rank grants Gary 100% increase in both his health and damage. Massive changes to health Stetmann, especially in his early game, which is his weakest point. However, the downside to this perk is that the movement speed outside of any stat zone is reduced by 90%, making Gary a lot more defensive and only really able to operate effectively inside of his territory or when the mobile stat field is active. The last of the prestige perks is Oil Baron, the last prestige that gives a massive buff to both your units and how much you're spending on them. While Mecha Infestors are no longer available and troops now cost 40% more minerals, as if they already weren't enough, every single troop upon getting a kill gains a stack of best oil, granting a bonus to attack speed and regeneration, which is capped at 20, making all units that kill a lot of enemies even more powerful with every single kill they get. And that is about it for the video. But not only that, but for the terrible names that this crazy yet very, very powerful commander has to offer. Hopefully this video is informative enough on how to play Egon Stetmann and his crazy kit. Just keep in mind that as long as you're expanding his stat zones, having an economy to support the type of army you need to make, you will be fine. Now, if you made it to the end of the video, first I'd like to apologize for the fact that this video took a lot longer and is a lot longer in length. I really tried to shorten it as much as I can, but there's so much mechanics and complexity revolving around this commander that really I couldn't cut a lot of corners, or at least as much as I would like to. But with all this being said, I really hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you're still interested, in the description below, I have all the previous commander videos in a playlist for all your educational game guide needs. If you love the content, love the series, hell, if you love me, be sure to scroll down below and hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all of the content coming your way. With all this being said, this is Toxic Spill. I hope you all have a fantastic day. I hope you're all ready for the finale of the co-op guide, which is going to be a real monumental point on the channel. And of course, just remember, do what you love. Toxic Spill, signing off.